They started killing old people. They cut and slaughtered them. Another survivor found the decapitated corpse of his 75-year-old grandmother in the ruins of his house. Still another survivor witnessed his grandmother get cut with a knife on the head, fall down, and then be struck on the body. Mr. President, the deliberate killing of infants and young children alongside the elderly shows that civilians were targeted as Rohingya across age and sex. This is a strong indicator of genocidal intent. Pervasive sexual violence was also integral to the operation at Minji. The UN fact-finding mission found that after systematically killing the men on the riverbanks, soldiers took women and girls to houses where they were raped and gang raped, then locked the doors and set the houses on fire. A rice miller witnessed groups of 5 to 7 women being taken into houses for 30 to 50 minutes, after which the houses were set alight. He saw women forced to enter houses in this way, but never saw any leave. Survivors who did escape described beatings, gang rapes, stabbings, cuttings with machetes, genital assaults with wooden sticks, and the killing of infants during the attacks. One described to the UN fact-finding mission how she was raped while soldiers stabbed her neck and abdomen. Her 28-day-old baby was thrown to the ground and died. Another mother informed Amnesty International that she was raped while soldiers slit her breastfeeding infant's throat and stabbed her older children as they tried to protect her. Yet another survivor testified as follows in a signed witness statement. I quote, "When I arrived at the house, there were dead women on the ground. I saw the military rip off the clothing of the other women, rape them, and kill them by beating. They slashed my throat and slashed my 3-month-old girl before throwing her onto the leg of a dead body on the ground. The military beat me with a big wooden stick, and then I was raped by 5 of them. After doing this to me, they brought more women into the house. I was half dead, but still alive. All other 4 women from my group were dead." Still another survivor explained in a signed witness statement how 7 soldiers took women into houses in groups of 5. She was in the 3rd group of women taken. Her 3 children also entered the house with her. Once inside, she saw 2 soldiers beat to death 2 of the women who had entered with her and rape her sister and another woman who were also in her group, before forcefully holding her hands while 2 additional soldiers raped her. When her children started screaming, the military stabbed and killed her 4-year-old son and her 1.5-year-old son. They also shot her 9-year-old daughter, but she survived. She and her daughter pretended that they were dead and then escaped as the soldiers set the house on fire. Her interviewer took several photos of the injuries she testified were caused during the attack.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
A bullet graze on top of her skull, a stab wound on the right side of her head, a stab wound on the back of her head, a knife wound on her left cheek, and a cut on her left ear inflicted when a soldier cut off her earring with a knife. Medical examinations of Rohingya women from Minji documented serious burn marks, stab wounds, and lacerations consistent with the accounts of these women. Médecins Sans Frontières, for example, reported that a rape survivor who was treated at its clinic had, quote, gashes that carved her skull and her torso, was covered with bruises and cuts that had to be stitched up. Members of the court, this organized sexual violence, coupled with mutilation and the killing of infants, caused serious bodily and mental harm and targeted the community's reproductive integrity. In the context of the killings and burnings, it is powerful evidence of a destructive purpose directed at the group as such. Further evidence of Myanmar's genocidal intent at Minji is the fact that the Tatmadaw burned bodies and razed the Rohingya part of the village. Witnesses described dead bodies being thrown into pits, doused with gasoline that had been delivered by helicopters, and set ablaze. Others saw multiple piles of burned bodies. UNISAT satellite imagery confirms that by 16 September 2017, Rohingya houses and structures in Minji were completely destroyed, while the neighboring ethnic Rakhine village to the south remained intact. This very selective destruction, obliteration of Rohingya structures and preservation of the neighboring Rakhine structures confirms discriminatory targeting and an intent to erase the Rohingya presence. The perpetrators were state organs acting under command. Witnesses interviewed by the UN fact-finding mission, the UN Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, and NGOs consistently identified Tatmadaw soldiers as the principal perpetrators, supported in some cases by ethnic Rakhine and members of other ethnic minorities. Some witnesses recognized Western Command insignia on the shoulders of the soldiers and described them as wearing camouflage military and helmets, while others observed people in Lon Tien, the paramilitary riot squad uniforms, alongside military, wielding knives and machetes. The UN fact-finding mission determined that the Tatmadaw's 99th Light Infantry Division primarily carried out the operation at Minji. Nasmul Islam, a former soldier familiar with Tatmadaw units, reported that at least 80 from that division were present on the day. These units, the Western Command, the 99th Light Infantry Division, and the Lon Tien, are state organs. Under established principles of state responsibility, their conduct is attributable to Myanmar. Their coordinated participation in uniform and with logistical support confirms centralized planning and implementation. The burning of bodies and Myanmar's efforts to prevent independent investigations in Minji impede precise enumeration of deaths. Nevertheless, UN fact-finding mission determined that credible information collected by Rohingya community volunteers in the refugee camps in southern Bangladesh indicates that at least 50 people died in Minji on 30 August 2017, including at least 400 who had been residents of Minji. On that estimate, a minimum of 10% of the Rohingya population in Minji was killed in a single day, in addition to the vast majority of Rohingya from other villages who had come to Minji to escape. Many families were virtually or entirely wiped out. On the screen is a photo of the family of one witness, a 33-year-old former farmer taken before the massacre. Other than him, everyone else in his household was killed on 30 August 2017. His 22-year-old wife, his 4 boys between 1 and 9, his mother-in-law, and his father-in-law. The scale, nature, and method of violence at Minji reflect the deliberate execution of a centrally directed campaign against the Rohingya. Taken together, these acts fall squarely within Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, including killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, and deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. Mr. President, members of the Court, Myanmar seeks to avoid this natural conclusion by characterizing Minji as a counterterrorism incident, in which Myanmar's military supposedly responded responsibly to, quote, multiple attacks in the village from about 700 ARSA attacks, armed with swords, spears, sticks, and guns. Relying on only 2 of its own Ministry of Defense documents and the statements of 2 military officers, Myanmar claims that its soldiers fired only, quote, warning shots and exercised proportional and incremental force as security measures allegedly intended to, quote, not attack Bengalis, but just to protect and rescue the Rakhine ethnic people against the ARSA terrorists. This account finds no support in the extensive independent evidence. On Myanmar's telling, somehow all the UN institutions, credible NGOs, and reputable journalists who documented the horrific events of 30 August 2017 at Minji missed that 700 ARSA terrorists were repeatedly attacking the Tatmadaw, an ethnic Rakhine there that day. To the contrary, the evidence makes clear that alleged ARSA threat at Minji was at most marginal. The UN fact-finding mission didn't record any armed engagement with ARSA there on 30 August 2017 and identified only 2 ARSA attacks in other village in the vicinity several days before. Instead, the UN mission, like numerous other independent investigators, identifies state forces as the primary actors in Minji. Contrary to Myanmar's claims, the UN mission also affirms that it found no indication that ARSA burned Rohingya villages or used landmines. Nor does the record support Myanmar's assertion that its conduct at Minji was limited to warning shots into the air and single shots aimed below the knee at supposed terrorist leaders. Instead, the evidence shows soldiers encircling hundreds of Rohingya on the riverbank and shooting those trying to escape. It shows the soldiers systematically killing men by shooting and stabbing to death those who survived the gunfire. It shows the deliberate killing of children, including infants, by taking them from their mothers and throwing them into the river or into fires. It shows soldiers taking women and girls to houses to be raped, stabbed, and killed. It shows methodical burning of Rohingya homes and those inside, dead or alive. Myanmar's response to what occurred in those houses to which the girls and women were taken is equally implausible. When asked, was there any incident involving detaining, interrogation, shaming, and inappropriate treatment and raping of Bengali women? Platoon Commander Captain Swear simply testifies, I quote, "None whatsoever." Myanmar's argument is refuted by multiple and mutually reinforcing independent sources. The UN fact-finding mission found, based on numerous witness interviews, that soldiers in Minji raped and gang-raped women and girls in houses and then locked the doors and set them alight. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International recorded survivors describing the same pattern. Médecins Sans Frontières documented injuries consistent with those rapes and burning, and sworn statement taken by Legal Action Worldwide from Minji residents confirmed the organized seizure, rape, and burning of women. Indeed, Myanmar's account of what happened at Minji, consisting only of its own self-serving military reporting and officer testimony, and lacking any independent or unbiased account, is squarely contradicted by the Gambia's evidence, which rests primarily on objective and reliable UN sources, reputable NGOs, and signed witness statements. As Mr. Reichler explained yesterday, the convergence of these independent sources on the same narrative and the physical corroboration in medical and satellite evidence meet the standard of proof this court applies in cases of exceptional gravity. Mr. President, from the totality of this evidence, the particular circumstances convincingly show that Myanmar, through its state organs, acted with the intent to destroy the Rohingya, in whole or in substantial part, in Minji, as in other locations across Rakhine State. I thank the court for its attention. With your permission, Ms. Diem Ho will continue the Gambia's presentation, perhaps after a brief break.
Yes, indeed. Before I give the floor to Ms. Diem Von Ho, the court will take a break of 15 minutes. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, Bayan Nikol. Itara 15 minute break le bahar 15 minute break badwa armato dehabujun itara yala zargoi 15 মিনিট ব্রেক লব বলবা বায়ানকল আজ দিনুম মাদে বহুত লাইভ সেশন ICJ হিয়ারিং গিয়ে হইয়া তো আই তো নছিলাম একনা করে হামে গিলাম আই নছিলাম তো হতা আওয়াজ বোঝা না হজানি বায়ানকল তারা জারগুয়া বেগুন তালু করা তো জারগুয়া বেগুন তো আই কেনা করে বিজি আছিলাম তো yan Allah boli re বহুত session কল আই দেখাই না পারিয়া আজ দিনের মধ্যে বহুত গিয়ে গয়া তো ইন দেখাই না পারি তো এতুন মাদা সিরিয়া এতুন মাদা জিয়ান পারি রিয়ান দেখাই দিরিয়া তোমারে সুন্দর করে সাই পারি বললাওয়া তো এই তারা বলে 15 মিনিট ব্রেক মানে 15 মিনিট ছুটি লই দিরিয়া জিরাত দিরি 15 মিনিট জিরাত দিরি তো আর ভাই জিয়ার জন্য সদ দিন কি এরে 10-11 জন দেখা যাত সাথ দে তো ইয়ান আল্লাহ বলি রে ভাই হাজির ন পারি বিশাল জয়শীল বেগুলন দেখাই বললা বলি রে লাইভ সেশন আর একান অন্দিলা দুয়া ইয়ান বানা দেখুন ন যেদুন আর আল্লাহ ফাইট করে রিম বেগুলন চ্যানেলের ভিতরে যে তুনত মনে হয় তুনত লই পারিবান ওগর রেকর্ড ওজার গুয়া হেন্দিলা করে ওগর রেকর্ড করে রাখি বললা মনসা শিলদিরি আর যেদুন লাইভ হর এরে হিম বেগুলনরে কম্পিউটার মাঝে সেভ করে রাখিলে তো বেশি লাম বোঝে বিত চ্যানেলের মাঝে রাখি পারিলেন বলে যে হনত দিন হিন যদি আর মতো চাইতে মনে হর জরুরিয়া লাগের হেন হলে চাই পারি বললা হাজ করি ইন চ্যানেলের মাঝে তুলে রাখি বললা আর জয়শীল তাই ন পারিয়া বেগুন তুলি ন পারি মমিকা যেটুকুন পারি সেটুকুন বেগুন তুলিম বলে আশা করি আর ভাই গুয়া সাইফুল ইসলাম আরবি মাঝে লেখে তো ভাই আয় আরবি মাঝে তো আরবি তা তো বেশি আই ভাই তুই তুই আরবি মাঝে লিখিলে কেন ভাই আরবি তো বেশি আই তো ভাই তো মোর ভাই নকল ইয়াদে মানে বেশি আই তো আর দেখি তো লামাল্লা কুড়িজনেই হওয়া মাশাআল্লাহ ইয়া কুড়িজনেই আই এরে আসসালামু আলাইকুম আর ভাই আয়াব ভাই হদ্দে আসসালামু আলাইকুম ব্রাদার ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম ব্রাদার কেন আছো ব্রাদার আর গুয়া আর ভাই চৌসেন লাইন হদ্দে হাই ব্রাদার আর ভাই জিয়া হদ্দে অলরাইট তাই আর তো হাজ করি আছে ইন চ্যানেলের মধ্যে তুলি রেকর্ড করে রাখি তো মনে হওয়া তাই এখন ভিজতুন মায়া হই ভাইয়া আফ্রিকা মায়া হওয়া দেখুন নে আফ্রিকা মায়া হওয়া হালা বুঝন নিয়া এবার বুতর হদ্দুর কিমতি সবই হিবা যা হত্তর গুয়া প্রফেসর হত্তর গুয়া লয়ার প্রফেসর বনি ভেজে সোনা এলম হদিন হেন্দিলা কিমতি দিরিয়া নেসেলে শিরে আসসালামু আলাইকুম আর ভাই এহসানুল্লাহ হদ্দে আসসালামু আলাইকুম ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম আর ভাই try to হদ্দি কি আসসালামু আলাইকুম এভরিওয়ান, আসসালামু আলাইকুম ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম আর ভাই try to হদ্দি কি আসসালামু আলাইকুম এভরিওয়ান, আসসালামু আলাইকুম ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম আর ভাই try to হদ্দি এভরিওয়ান, মাশাআল্লাহ বে বেগুনরে এভরিওয়ান বেগুনরে সালাম দি দিয়া মাশাআল্লাহ তাই সাইফুল্লাহ ভাইয়া হদ্দে আর মত থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ ভাই তাইলে মিনজি হদিয়ান কি ভাড়া হয় কারণে মন্ডুর হেরেওয়া মিনজি ইয়াম বর্বিসম মানে মিনজি হইলে কিদেরি ইয়ানর হদে তুলি 2017 মাদে মন্ডুম মাদে বেশি মানুষ মারি ফেলাই দি ফাজ্জাঠিয়ারে মারি ফেলাই দি ইয়ান হইদে মিনজি তুলি এরে ইউএন অর ফ্যাক্ট ফাইন্ডিং মিশন কো জিবা আসিয়া হিবার রিপোর্টর হইদিরি কিন্তু হিবা ইয়ে দুন রিপোর্ট জিন ইবে তুয়াইরে লই ফাইয়ে ইবতারা তালাশ করিয়রে জিন লত পাইয়ে সই বিশ্বাস করি পারে দে হেন্দিলা খবরের ইতরা লই দে হেন্দিলা রিপোর্টর লই দে ইতরা কিন্তু হেরে ন গলে দি ইউএন ফ্যাক্ট ফাইন্ডিং মেশিনে দ তুয়াই ন ফাদে হেন্দিলা বিশ্বাসী ফারায়া নতু বেশি মানুষ মারি ফেলাই জাগাইয়া নতুন মিনজি হতে ফারায়া নতু জাগাইয়া নতুন তাই তাহলে এতল্লা হইদে এরা আজ্জা রিপোর্ট দিয়ে দেহে আজ যাইবে মে হইবে হতে মিন জিতু বলে সারা হাস্যত মানুষ মারি ফেলাইয়ে হেন হইরে লেখিয়া মিনজি হতে ফারাইয়া নতুন বানা সন্দিন বলে হয় কারণে 2017 অগস্ট তারিখের দিন 2000 30 তারিখের দিন মিনজি মাদে হে দুন মানুষ মারি ফেলাই দিয়া একু দিনে হেন কদ্দিরি বুঝলেন আওয়াজ বুঝা যান না জানি তোমরা এরে বজনা আরে সালাম দিও আসসালামু আলাইকুম হাউ আর ইউ ব্রাদার ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম মাই ব্রাদার আই এম ফাইন আই গমাসি ব্রাদার ছেলে যাও সিডে 14 জন আছে হতে 14 জন আর ভাই জিআই হতে 14 জন কি আছে তো ভাই 14 জন আছে বলে হর তো এই তো লাহদ্দিরি বাইন কেন গইতাম আর আরে মারি ফেলাই টাইমত তো আজ্জা আর আল্লাহ আর আরে মারি ফেলাই দিহি আনাল্লাহ খানুনর বুতুতুন হদুকুন আর কলমা হুজ্জিদে বাইন দে মেহনত করিয়রে আর আল্লাহ বলিয়রে বিচার তুই বললা সাথ দিরি শাহরুখ খান আসসালামু আলাইকুম ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম ওকে ক্লিয়ার ভয়েস থ্যাংক ইউ আই মাইক্রোফোন লাগাইয়া মাইক্রোফোন ইয়ানো মাদে কি আছে কি নাই হওয়ার না কোনে দিয়ে নাই তো তাই আই দাসে এরে যিন নেকি ইতারা হত ভবিষ্যৎ আই মাইক্রোফোন নলাগাইব আই নমাতি মাইক্রোফোন নলাগাই মাইক্রোফোন লাগাইলে আওয়াজ বনে যাগৈ লেফট হম্মা দে তো আর তো হানে ফোনা ফুরিব আই হানে ফুনি বললা আর তো মাইক্রোফোন নাই ইয়ান হসা 5 টিয়া ইয়ান মালয়েশিয়ার রিঙ্গিত 5 টিয়া হসা ওয়া ইয়ান লো বানা হইবার দেরি রেকর্ড করিবার দেরি ফুনি নপারে ওয়া মাইক্রোফোন ইয়ান তই আর কলমা হুজ্জিদে বাই আইন মুসলমানে আরে আরখানার জবিনন মাদে বর্মার বুথরে কাফের কলে মারি ফেলাত দিয়ে আনরে হিতারা যাইরে দাঁড়ি যাইরে বলদি নপারিলিও তারা কি করছি দে খানুর বুদুত্তুন দুনিয়ার একখান খানুর বুদুত্তুন আর আল্লাহ ইনসাফ সাথ দিরি তই তারা যে পয়সা হস্তা করি আর রোহিঙ্গা তখন এতিয়ানো লই তারা যে পয়সা হস্তা করি তারা আর আল্লাহ বলিয়রে একখান আর আরে ইনসাফ লজি বল্লাহ বলিয়রে একখান কুশিশ করে দিরি ভাই ইয়ানো জুরিয়া কি নথি যাও এই হতিয়া ন তো আর হইনে পারি তো ইয়ানো জুরিয়া দেশ পাইম নে বলে তো নাপাইম ইয়ানো জুরিয়া বর্মারে হদ্দুর নুকসান করিবার হদ দিয়া তো বাফিসা হুরিব ইয়া মমিকা যাইরে লগ পাইম হার যে দিরইব বর্মার গভর্নমেন্ট হদি বাড়ি ইতি গোয়েন্দিল্লা জালেম করবেন তারে একখান আরা দুনিয়ার একখান 2 নম্বর আদালত মধ্যে তুলি ফেলছি ICJ জীবানিকে হয় বা UN-র 2 নম্বর আদালত 1 নম্বর আদালত হয়ে দিয়ে ICC International Court of International Criminal Court iba International Criminal Court iboide ICC ya zibori boide International Court of Justice তাই ইবইদে 2 নম্বর উভয় নম্বর তাই বর্মারে কি করি পারিব হদে সোয়ালিয়ান তো আই জবাব দিন হারির ইয়ান আই নিজত হনি পারি বর্মারে কি নুকসান করি ফেজ জুমারা তো ইয়ান জরিয়া কি হই পারে হদ দিয়ান তো আর দুগ নবুজির কিন্তু আতো ওয়ান খুশি লাগের আর বাই এন্ডে আর রোহিঙ্গায়ে মিওলাঙ্গার মানসরে আদালত মাদে তুলি ফেজি মাকামাম মাদে তুলি ফেজি তুলিওরে তারে সল করি পারির হ্যাঁ কদে দুনিয়ার বাসা প্রফেসর অকলে ইয়ানোর বাবুতে ফাইট করের ইয়ান আল্লাহ বহুত কাফি বুঝন নিয়া হেন্দিলা আরিওয়া আল্লাহ ইয়ানো বহুত কাফি তো এতল্লাহ জেন্দি লইব জিয়ান গরের ইয়ান আরাতুন ওয়েলকাম করা ফুরিব গমইয়ে হওয়া ফুরিব গজ্জে দেই তারারে তারিফ করা ফুরিব ইয়ান গজ্জে দে গাম্বিয়া আয়ের গজ্জে কিন্তু গ্যাম্বিয়ারে যেদুকুন সাথে দিয়া ফুরি হিন OIC বুঝন নিয়া তই OIC আর 57 মুসলমানর ইসলামিক কান্ট্রি আছে দিয়া এ হিবাতু দিয়ে দেই বুঝন নিয়া তা আরারে OIC তুন ইয়ান একখান কানুনত্তর হতুন একখান মৌকা দিয়ে দিয়া সোয়ারে হমদিয়া তো এতল্লাহ জিয়ান গজ্জিরি তারা আল্লাহ যে তারা গজ্জিরি এর দূরত্ব নগত্য বলে আরা হারা হইতাম বই বুঝন নিয়া দুনিয়ার মন্তন বর্মারে দুধ সে হদে হিন্দিল্লা তোর কম্মাতে মজা গলাই নুনি আর ওয়াঙ্গে গজ্জি দিরি বর্মারে আর ওয়াঙ্গে বর্মারে তিয়া মাদে বেজ্জিতি গজ্জি দিবা আর ওয়াঙ্গে গজ্জি দি ও মর রোহিঙ্গা ভাই অনেক কল প্রতি জন তোরা বেগুন পাওয়ারফুল আর দেশর হক নদীরে দূর আর পাওয়ারফুল আর যদি দেশের হক দিতে বলি আর হক দূর হইতাম যাগই হক দূর হইতাম ভাবিস বুঝল নিয়া আর নিরস ন মিয়লাঙ্গার পর্যন্ত ফেওয়ারেন টক করা বাই দে আর রোহিঙ্গা করা বাই দে যে দুন রোহিঙ্গা আসো নিজে সমনতার্য আর ওতনর আর হক নদে দোয়া আর হক নদী ওরে দেশ সারা বানাই ফিলাই দে হেন হালত মাঝে দ মাইডে নারলে মাইডে হেন হালত মাঝে দ আর ওরে জেনোসাইড চলিয়ে দিত আর সমাজ বা এক দূরত আছে দিয়ান বহুত বালা তক্কাত আছে ইন কি করতো অনেক কম হতম কারওয়াই করতে আরে কম হতম কারওয়াই মানে কি হরনি দুনিয়ায় তুন রোহিঙ্গা হদে কমিবা এক কুমত কম হিসাবে ogwa kom hisabe ekumotot namoddu nota kon Rohingya hode ba kombe hondilla mancha azugure saite sale ogwa Rohingya forma to ayore nofafan করে দে ইয়া নর হতে জেনোসাইড হেন্দিলা জেনোসাইড করছে দে আজও আরা এদুর মজবুত আছি নিজর সমাজলা নিজর তো আদর আছে নিজর ভাই রোহিঙ্গা ভাই ইন্দল্লা আরা তো আদর আছে আরা যেহে দূর বাবা তো মানো দেখি ইয়ান গঙ্গুরি পয়েন্টের হতা মরবা এনে কল আর ওরে দুম জুলুম করি বাদত তো ইনে এন্দিলা জুলুম হাইলে মানুষ কেন যাবো কারণে মানুষ একজনের গুচ্ছা একজন হাত হেন্দিল যাবে আজ আরা আই যদি মেরিসাত থাকি আর কান জাগাম মাদে আর রোহিঙ্গা বাইক গধুতি দুঃখ পায়ন কলে আর তো ফেট ফুরত আজ হেন কলে আর রোহিঙ্গা ইবা আজ পেট্রেট আর তুন কোমরে নিজের কোমরে আদর করে দে আদরি বাহ্য আছে জেনোসাইড করলে মানুষ দর্ব ধরে যাগই নিজের কোমরে নিজের কোমে গুচ্ছা হাইব আদর নকরিব নাফরত করিব হেন্দিল যাবে হে কম হিবা আর রাজ্য ইতারা টার্গেট পুরা করে নেওয়া পারে বর্মাইয়া আরারে জেন্দিল্লা কম খতম কারবাই করতে চাইয়ে এক কুমত দুনিয়া টুকরা ফিলতে চাইয়ে নো আজ্য করে নেওয়া পারে সই আর বেশা বেশি বে কুসুরি মা বোনান বাপ্পাইয়ান আলম উলমা অকল গুড়া গুড়া মা সুম্বা সকল মারি ফেলাই বেশি মারি ফেলাই কিন্তু হিতারার মকসদ হিয়ান ন ইতারার মকসদ হদুনরে মারি আর হদুনরে রেডি হলো নিবা ন ইতারার মকসদ রোহিঙ্গা হদিবা বংশদ পুরা জঙ্গই আলহামদুলিল্লাহ আজ আরা দুনিয়ার মাদের রোহিঙ্গা চিন্তা আজি আজ আরার হক আল্লাহ আরা ফাইট করির আরারে তারা দোষা এদুর করি না পারে তারা না কামাই আরারে জেনোসাইড করন মাদে বুঝন নিয়া তো এতল্লাহ আইসিজে আইসিসি আই তোরারে প্রতিবার হই ইতার আরারে দেশ লো দিনে পারিব দুনিয়ার হনক গোয়া ইনসানর হক দায়ে আরা দেশ লো দিনে পারিব না পারলে না হরক বই কি করে আরা চাই আরা হালত চাই তাই আনার বাবুতে কি হর কি করে ইয়ান চাই না পারলে না হরক বই আর আল্লাহ ইয়ানত কাফি তারে ইনসাফত তুলে দিয়ে ইয়ানত কাফি আর আল্লাহ আরারা হনিকে দিল না আর কোন আড়ালইম আরাদন আড়ালইম মাহা আরাদ দেশ আড়ালইম আরাদ দেশ আড়ালে বললা আরা ফাইট করিন নি আরা আরাদ দেশ আরা হামাকালইম মোর বাইনে কল এতল্লাহ জাস কতক্ষণ নেওয়া বেঙ্গলি পদে অন দে এন দে আইসিসি বন্যায় করা শুরু কতক্ষণ আছে বন্যায় কালা করা ঘরের কি করে চাই থাকিব আরা হবেরি নি ইতার আরারে কিছু করে দিব দিয়ান যা চাই ইনসাফ কি করে চাই আরা দুশ্মনরে হমদিলা করি তাই সেরাতে চাই আরা দুশ্মনরে হমদিলা করি কেন করতে চাই বুঝন নিয়া তাই ইয়ান দে আর মকসদ নাই
Please be seated. The sitting is resumed. I now give the floor to Ms. Diem Phon Ho. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the court, It is an honor to address you for the first time, and a special privilege and responsibility to do so on behalf of the Gambia. I will continue the Gambia submission by describing the clearance operation that Myanmar conducted in a second village in northern Rakhine State, known as Chutpin. You just heard from Ms. Pasipanutka about the brutal clearance operation visited upon the village of Minji. As I will explain, a remarkably similar and cruel fate befell Chutpin, a different village in a different township, more than 90 kilometers from Minji, where the Tatmadaw massacred some 400 Rohingya. As Mr. Reichler showed you yesterday, Chutpin, known in Rohingya as Shrap Parung, is a village tract in northern Ratadang Township, surrounded by rice paddies and forest. It included a Rohingya settlement, at the time inhabited by about 1,200 people, and a nearby ethnic Rakhine hamlet with an estimated population of 400. Rohingya families there were farmers and laborers, raising livestock and cultivating vegetables. Many were at home for lunch or at the mosque for prayers when the Tatmadaw began the clearance operation at around 2 p.m. on the 27th of August 2017. Accompanied by other security forces and ethnic Rakhine people, Tatmadaw soldiers emerged from the direction of the Rakhine hamlet and encircled the Rohingya village. The clearance operation in Chutpin then unfolded according to a familiar modus operandi, characterized by 5 distinctive features. First, indiscriminate killing of Rohingya civilians. The UN fact-finding mission found, quote, the security forces opened fire, shooting at villagers, including those who were fleeing, end quote. This finding is corroborated by considerable first-hand witness testimony and independent investigations by reputable organizations. Amnesty International Many Rohingya, including children, were killed. A mother recalled the murder of her 2.5-year-old son, quote, the military were all around shooting. A bullet shot through my son's stomach and opened it. I saw the blood coming out of his stomach and I fainted, end quote. The infant died soon after. Another survivor, a 12-year-old girl named Fatima, described how soldiers opened fire from behind her family as they were running from their house, killing her father and her 10-year-old sister. The Tatmadaw went door to door, dragged people out, and shot them at point-blank range, or cut their throats with large knives. As a witness told Fortified Rights, the military shot people, and the Rakhine were cutting heads. Some of the people were shot by the military first, and when they were lying down, the Rakhine came and cut their necks. As another survivor told the UN fact-finding mission, if people were not killed by the first gunshots, they were slaughtered with long knives to make sure they were really dead. The second pattern in Chutpin is that the men and boys were singled out and systematically executed. In the northern part of Chutpin, for example, soldiers forced a group of villagers into a school and executed the men and boys. A victim whose husband was killed recalled, "I saw so many bodies in front of the school. Some had been shot, some had been cut. All of the dead bodies were bound, their hands tied with rope. There were bullets on the ground everywhere. There was so much blood. The dead bodies were like stones in a field." House after house, the Tatmadaw repeated this pattern. When soldiers entered into a woman's home, they took her husband and father-in-law into the yard and shot them there. In another, they dragged a man outside and fired repeatedly into his chest. Another survivor saw her husband and son tied up, beaten, and slaughtered as a soldier cut their throats. In a statement taken by the IIMM, a witness testified, "The military took my son. They brought him to the alley of a paddy field. 4 soldiers surrounded my son. He was killed in front of my own eyes. A soldier put bullets into his long gun and shot him in the temple. He died immediately." Those Rohingya who managed to reach a paddy field found no safety. The Tatmadaw apprehended them, separated the men and boys, tied their hands behind their backs, and shot them all. The third modus operandi of the Tatmadaw was to kill women, children, the elderly, and the disabled. The UN fact-finding mission determined that, quote, "a large number of women and children were victims of the attacks. Children, including infants and babies, were specifically targeted. Some were wrenched from their mothers' arms and thrown to the ground. Others were thrown into fires and burned alive." This finding is again corroborated by witness testimony and independent reports from reputable organizations. A witness, for example, testified to the IIMM how she saw the military gather hay to start a fire and threw some little children in the fire. She said, "I saw 4 or 5 of them being thrown. They were throwing them like a ball." Another survivor recalled how after the Tatmadaw had left, he found the bodies of his 2 nephews in the fields beheaded. One was 6 years old, the other was 9 years old. One woman recounted, as she was being kicked and punched, she felt her infant son ripped from her arms and saw one of the military men throw him on the ground. As soon as he hit the ground, he was shot and killed. Witness NJ is a victim from Chutpin. The court will hear directly from her next week. She has described how the military grabbed her 3-year-old son out of her arms, used a knife to stab him around the chest or stomach area, and some of his innards spilled out. The military then carried her son towards her neighbor's burning house. She recalled, "I could hear my son screaming and see him struggling and arching his back, trying to break free. I saw them throw my son into the burning house. I could no longer see my son or hear him screaming." As for the fate of the elderly and disabled people in Chutpen, one elderly woman described to the UN fact-finding mission the brutal murder of her 70-year-old brother. Quote, "Soldiers used rifle butts to beat my brother on the head, and I saw his brains come out." End quote. Other witnesses confirmed that the Tatmadaw captured and killed a man named Osman, who had both physical and mental disabilities. One witness recalled that soldiers told him to stand up, but he was not able to stand up due to his condition. The military then shot him in his chest. He died immediately. In a fourth familiar hallmark of the clearance operation, the UN fact-finding mission concluded that the Tatmadaw committed sexual violence, including rape, gang rape, sexual mutilation, and sexual humiliation against women and girls in Chutpen. This finding is fully corroborated by independent investigations and survivors' testimony. Allow me to mention a few. One survivor recalled the rape and murder of the wife of a local imam. "I saw her taken from the house and raped by soldiers. After they raped her, they killed her. She was taken to the road, and one soldier cut her neck and cut her breasts off." In another instance, the Tatmadaw gang raped 4 women in the same family. They were blindfolded, dragged around the house, and beaten. After regaining consciousness, the mother found the naked bodies of her daughters lying on their backs, motionless. In the paddy field to which dozens of Rohingya fled, the Tatmadaw captured them, killed the men and boys, and raped the women. A group of 7 women was rounded up and taken into some bushes. When one woman resisted, she was shot dead. A soldier cut off one of her breasts and held it up as a warning to the others. One victim later reported, quote, "4 or 5 soldiers held me down and raped me." At the same school where the Tatmadaw slaughtered men and boys en masse, they also raped and gang raped women. As the victim told the IIMM, "Once the militaries took me inside the school, they blindfolded me with my hijab. They threw me on the floor, on my back, and did whatever they wanted. By this, I mean they raped me. More than one raped me, but I don't know how many. Maybe 2 or 3. Another recounted that when the Tatmadaw soldiers dragged her to the school, she found women screaming and crying and saw 2 women being raped and one baby of one of the victims being thrown into a fire. Others recounted being raped repeatedly, along with other women, for 3 hours. Witness NJ also testified that she was beaten and raped by 2 soldiers until she lost consciousness. This happened after she witnessed the brutal murder of her son at the hands of the Tatmadaw. Mr. President, the Tatmadaw perpetrated sexual violence against women and girls in Chutpen in a particularly vicious manner, as if the rape and gang rape were not cruel enough. Victims included children. Others were pregnant and died bleeding uncontrollably, their naked bodies covered in blood from head to toe. One victim was raped 40 days after giving birth. As her baby was crying, a soldier cut off the woman's breast and gave it to the child. Another witness, in a statement obtained by the IIMM, testified, "I have seen with my own eyes a woman 9 months pregnant raped and killed with a knife. They cut her belly. The fifth distinctive feature of the Tatmada's clearance operation in Chutpin is the intentional destruction of the Rohingya part of the village. The UN fact-finding mission determined that Myanmar security forces used launchers to set houses on fire, including those still occupied, and forced Rohingya inside houses, which were then intentionally set alight. Own investigation likewise reported that the soldiers, the BGP border guard police, and local vigilantes burned Rohingya houses using petrol can and matchsticks and projectiles shot from a shoulder-fired grenade launcher. A witness told Fortified Rights that the military took some dead bodies and put them in a cowshed. They piled them in the shed and then just burned them, including the shed. UNOSAT analysis of satellite imagery confirms that the total destruction of Chutpin took place in the days immediately following the clearance operation. The burn pattern is comprehensive on the Rohingya side, shown in the brown areas in the middle of the image on your screen. Meanwhile, the nearby Rakhine hamlet, shown on the top right corner of the image on your screen, remained intact. Based on its own forensic examinations and the consistent and detailed testimony of Chutpin survivor, Physicians for Human Rights concluded that, quote, the savagery inflicted on the people of Chutpin is a typical example of the widespread and systematic campaign that Myanmar authorities have waged against the Rohingya people. The UN fact-finding mission determined that the Tatmada, specifically the 33rd Light Infantry Division, led the Chutpin clearance operations, acting in concert with other security forces and ethnic Rakhine people, including the ethnic Rakhine chairperson of Chutpin. Amnesty International reached the same conclusion, reporting that, quote, the principal perpetrators of the 27 August massacre and rapes in Chutpin were soldiers from a unit of the 33rd Light Infantry Division. A witness also confirms in a statement taken by the IIMM that the perpetrators in Chutpin were Myanmar's security forces. Quote, that day, military, police were all mixed and working together, burning houses, cutting people with knives, or shooting at running people. I could see various security forces clearly and distinguish them by their uniforms. In the end, the Tatmada killed hundreds of Rohingya and brutalized hundreds more in the clearance operation at Chutpin. Independent assessments placed the death toll at between 358 and 400, including an estimate of 127 children under the age of 6. That is 1/3 of the Rohingya population in Chutpin. Survivors described seeing bodies strewn across houses, lanes, and fields. Others saw children's corpses floating in the river. An exact accounting in Chutpin is impossible, shot and dismembered and everything burned. But, Mr. President, the convergence of the UN fact-finding mission's report, consistent witness testimony, independent investigations, clinical findings, and even satellite imagery admits of only one conclusion. There was an organized and coordinated attack to destroy the Rohingya in Chutpin. Mr. President, members of the court, what does Myanmar say about Chutpin? Counterterrorism. What does Myanmar say about the ruthless killing of unarmed civilians? Counterterrorism. What does Myanmar say about the Tatmadaw raping and gang raping women and girls? Counterterrorism. And what does Myanmar say about the Tatmadaw stabbing and burning children alive? Counterterrorism. That does not add up. Counterterrorism cannot explain any of the horrific acts of brutality, sexual violence, and wanton cruelty we have just reviewed. Myanmar argues that the Gambia's reliance on the evidence I have just described is somehow flawed because it, quote, ignores the context and circumstances in which the counterterrorism operations took place. Myanmar specifically alleges that a member of ASA from Chutpin attacked the Chutpin police with homemade bombs, as if that could be an excuse for targeting everyone in the village, for massacring children and infants, and for raping women and girls. But even if such an attack did occur, the UN fact-finding mission pointed out that, quote, plans for a clearance operation in Chutpin appear to have been made prior to this incident, end quote. In an attempt to explain this so-called counter-terrorism context, Myanmar relies exclusively on three things: a military operational report, a statement from a certain Captain Mang, company commander of Infantry Regiment No. 4, who participated in the clearance operation, and statements from supposed ASA members. Yet none of these sources engages with, let alone justifies, what the Tatmadaw actually did to the Rohingya in Chutpin. To begin with, take Annex 120 to Myanmar's counter-memorial. This is the military operational report of the Myanmar Defense Services that purports to describe the clearance operation at Chutpin. It dwells on alleged clashes between the military and the, quote, Bengali terrorists, which started with the military's warning shots into the air. As the so-called terrorists continue to approach, the two sides exchange fire. These terrorists, we are told, set fire to the southwesternmost part of the village and retreated. The military then, quote, carried out security actions. And there it stops. No details of what the so-called security actions in Chutpin entailed. No mention of any burnings, killings, brutality, or sexual violence. Mr. President, as with Minji, the reality in Chutpin was not clashes with terrorists. The Tatmadaw indiscriminately, deliberately, and systematically killed Rohingya men, women, and children, raped and gang-raped women in the most cruel manners, and set houses ablaze. As Professor Newton will tell you next week, nothing in modern counterinsurgency doctrine and nothing in Myanmar's own purported rules of engagement permits that. Turning to Captain Mang's statement, which Myanmar calls contemporaneous military evidence. It repeats much of the same narrative as the military operational report. A supposed defensive operation against, quote, Bengali terrorists, using, quote, proportionate and defensive force. The statement also describes Captain Mang's own orders given to his subordinates, said to be, quote, in accordance with the right to protect and the rules of engagement, including, quote, not to shoot the elderly people, women, children, those who turned back, and ran away, and the Bengali civilians who are staying inside their houses. There are at the outset serious concerns as to the independence and reliability of Captain Mang's testimony. He is a serving military officer who personally participated in the clearance operation. Moreover, his statement was taken in 2017 in a Myanmar military investigation of unknown composition and procedure. These internal military processes, as Darjan will explain, have been widely criticized to be systematically flawed and conducive to impunity. But even setting these difficulties aside, his statement is uncorroborated by any independent source and is flatly contradicted by the overwhelming evidence of what actually took place in Chutpin. The record shows indiscriminate shooting, including at those who were running away, the killing of infants and children, disabled and elderly people, mutilation and raping of women and girls, and houses set alight with people still inside. Mr. President, is this counterterrorism? Not according to Myanmar's own purported rules of engagement. Not according to Captain Mang, even if we take what he supposedly ordered his subordinates to do at face value. Unless, of course, the entire Rohingya population in Chutpin is treated as terrorists. Myanmar relies on statements from men it claims to be ARSA members to suggest that ARSA and Rohingya villagers themselves burned Chutpin. As the Gambia explained in its reply, these men are all incarcerated by Myanmar and thus under Myanmar's complete control in the Butidang prison, a penal facility notorious for engaging in torture and other forms of abuse. Indeed, the IIMM observed in its report published in May 2024 that most Rohingya detainees in Butidang prison were subjected to, quote, verbal and physical mistreatment, torture, and other inhumane acts perpetrated by prison guards, including the head of prison, sometimes resulting in death. But Myanmar answers that there is simply no evidence that these witnesses were coerced or forced into making false statements. Yet, each and every statement from Myanmar counter-memorial and rejoinder from these men recites a boilerplate disclaimer that the witness was not beaten, tortured, or assaulted by the security forces. Mr. President, one wonders whether the fact that these men all arrived at these very similar verbal formulations, unaided over several years, is a testament to their shared clarity of recollection. Or perhaps there is a more reasonable inference. Such exculpatory language has been scripted. As Mr. Reichler explained yesterday, in Croatia versus Serbia, the court refused to accord any evidentiary weight to records of interviews by Croatians where, quote, accused appear to be those of the police officers themselves. In this case, the court should likewise give no evidentiary weight to statements extracted in custody in a party's exclusive control, where coercion is a known risk. As the Gambia further pointed out, in each one of these statements, the individual purportedly identifies himself as, quote, Bengali. That is a delegitimizing label imposed by Myanmar and rejected by the Rohingya, including the very small number who belong to ARSA, who expressly identify themselves as the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. If anything defeats the credibility of these prisoners' statements, it is their undoubtedly coerced self-description as Bengalis. Moreover, the contention that Asa and Rohingya villagers burned their own village is contradicted by overwhelming evidence in the form of extensive witness testimony, the reports from the UN fact-finding mission, and reports from reputable NGOs, all confirming that the fires in Rohingya villages were started not by Asa or any of its alleged supporters, but by the Tatmadaw. Having failed to engage with the Gambia's evidence, Myanmar resorts to a blanket denial that the Myanmar Defense Services engaged in any indiscriminate physical and/or sexual violence in Chutpen. It does not even attempt to provide evidence negating the fact that these atrocities occurred, much less to show that they are not imbued with genocidal intent. The Gambia's account of what happened in Chutpen rests on independent, multifaceted, and convergent proof. The UN fact-finding mission's 2018 report, grounded in more than 50 witness interviews from Chutpen, is corroborated by separate investigations by Amnesty International, Physicians for Human Rights, Fortified Rights, the International State Crime Initiative, as well as more than 20 witness accounts compiled by law, 4 signed witness statements taken by the IIMM, and the affidavit of witness NJ. Myanmar somehow dismisses this body of evidence as unreliable. But as Mr. Reichler explained yesterday, the Gambia's evidence is not only credible, it is compelling, and it warrants substantial weight. Myanmar has offered nothing in response but its own military operational report, statement from its own military officer, and words ascribed to detainees in its custody in one of its most notorious torture-ridden prisons. Its attempt to refute and discredit the Gambia's evidence is cynical. Mr. President, let us consider their challenge to the Gambia's evidence in Chutpen. First, Myanmar points to 2 IIMM witness statements which it says contradict our position that sexual violence is part of the Tatmadaw's modus operandi in Chutpen. In reality, those witnesses merely note that a group of women from Chutpen were allowed by the military to proceed to Uorofara, a nearby village. The witnesses do not say that no killing or sexual violence occurred at Chutpen, only that it did not occur to those women. Their testimony does not negate the evidence from multiple credible sources regarding what happened to scores of women and girls elsewhere in the village at the hands of other soldiers. That evidence leaves no doubt that the Tatmadaw perpetrated sexual violence against Rohingya women and girls in Chutpen. Second, Myanmar asserts that because some witness statements and account summaries from Legal Action Worldwide are anonymous and in one identified case reflect inconsistencies between 2 accounts given by the same person, none of the law material should be trusted. To be clear, the Gambia does not rely on either of these 2 accounts in respect of Chutpen. But in any event, this misses the point. Anonymization and interview notes are standard protection measures in atrocity documentation, and they do not make the content false. What matters is whether different independent sources point to the same core facts, and here they do. The witness accounts provided by law for Chutpen align with the UN fact-finding mission's determinations, with the 4 witness statements taken by the IIMM, with independent organization reports, and also with medical reporting of injuries that are typical of sexual violence. Myanmar's suggestion that identify one witness as the same individual across a collated interview note and a later signed statement somehow taints the entire corpus of the Gambia's evidence on Chutpen, is simply not serious. Myanmar's challenge to the Gambia's evidence picks at labels, formats, and isolated discrepancies while avoiding the substance. The totality of the evidence on Chutpin is consistent and mutually reinforcing on the essential details of the clearance operation, namely indiscriminate shooting at fleeing civilians, targeting of infants and children, sexual violence, and the burning of Rohingya homes surgically and comprehensively. None of that is diminished by a microscope at isolated discrepancies in a very small number of witness accounts. The fact that Myanmar has had to go to such lengths in search of a defense speaks to the desperation of its case. The convergence across multiple sources of independent evidence points clearly, convincingly, and overwhelmingly to one conclusion. The Tatmadaw conducted an organized operation with the intent to destroy the Rohingya in Chutpin and elsewhere. Mr. President, members of the court, I thank you for your kind attention and respectfully request that you call to the podium Ms. Mariama Ngom to continue the Gambia submission.
I thank Ms. Diem Phuong Ho for her statement. I now call Ms. Mariana Ngum to the podium. You have the floor, madam.
Mr. President, honorable members of the court, good afternoon. It is an honor to appear before you on behalf of the Republic of the Gambia. I will continue the Gambia's presentation of evidence by discussing Mongnu, another village in northern Rakhine State, where Myanmar engaged in horrific acts of violence and labeled it clearance operation. My colleagues described the acts of genocide that took place in Mingi and Chutpin. I will address how, on 27 August 2017, Myanmar security forces also launched a large-scale attack in Mongnu against innocent, unarmed Rohingya civilians. As the evidence will demonstrate, what occurred in Mongnu was not an isolated event. It was deliberate, organized assault that closely mirrored the pattern of clearance operation carried out in other villages across northern Rakhine State. The reports of the UN fact-finding mission, multiple witness testimonies, and other independent investigations show that the clearance operation in Mongnu followed the same modus operandi and resulting in the same devastating consequences: indiscriminate attacks, the separation and killing of men and boys, the widespread sexual violence against women and girls, and the burning of homes to erase Rohingya from Myanmar's maps. Mr. President, honorable members of the court, Myanmar conducted a brutal clearance operation in Mongnu. As shown on the screens before you, Mongnu, known in Rohingya as Monupara, is located in Budidong Township within the Chindamar village tract. Prior to August 2017, Mongnu was home to roughly 400 Rohingya households. In the days before the clearance operation, the population increased as residents from nearby Pongtampin fled in Mongnu, seeking safety after a similar operation there 2 days earlier. Many believed that they would be protected in an imminent compound at the heart of the village, a place owned by families known to have long-standing ties with the security forces. They were wrong. What followed on 27 August was a carefully orchestrated attack that unfolded with chilling predictability. The clearance operation in Mongnu resembled those in other villages in 4 important aspects. First, the Tatmadaw's operation in Mongnu likewise involved indiscriminate attacks against Rohingya civilians, including children. According to the UN fact-finding mission, upon arriving at Mongnu, the Tatmadaw split in coordinated squads and advanced into the village on foot, rounding up the villagers. Several witnesses identified the soldiers as being from the 564th Light Infantry Battalion. Since the military bases had long operated near the village, certain soldiers were known and readily recognizable by the residents. The soldiers opened fire on fleeing villagers as they moved inward into the village. As one witness testified in a signed statement, the military started firing as they made a circle inside the village and brought all the people to the place where they were killed. Another witness described how the military surrounded the village from all sides and started firing. In the witness's words, and I quote, "When they found the people in front of them in the village, they killed them," close quote. The troops converged on the compound where Rohingya were gathered. They then pounded on doors, ordering people to come out of the house and threatening to set the houses on fire. Once the doors were forced open, soldiers burst inside and fired, kicking out those who were screaming and trying to escape. One witness describes how those in houses heard the sounds of guns, the sounds of bullets, which went on and then when the people were weak, they mutilated the bodies with long knives. The gunfire did not spare children. Multiple witnesses reported to the UN fact-finding mission that during this encounter, a young child was struck in the head by a bullet fired by the military and died shortly afterward. A witness testified in his signed statement that a 10-year-old boy was hit and his brain came out from his head. Second, as elsewhere, the Tatmadaw in Mongnu singled out men and boys and killed them in deliberate, organized manner. Once inside the compound, the soldiers separated the men from the larger group of civilians. The women and children were locked in similar houses where screams could be heard. The men and boys were beaten, bound, and dragged into the shared courtyard. They were then lined up in smaller groups and ordered to kneel or lie face down. According to eyewitnesses, the soldiers took the men out of the house and tied them up, their hands up his hands with a rope, while repeatedly calling him and his brother, Kalar. One of the men who owned the compound, Zahid Hussein, was among the first to be killed. He was stabbed to death in the stomach, while two soldiers restrained him. After Zahid Hussein was stabbed, he was heard screaming that everyone should come out of the house because the soldiers were going to burn it down. Hearing his scream, two of his sons came out, but both of them were shot dead. The soldiers then proceeded to execute the remaining men and boys who were either kneeling or laying face down on the ground with their hands tied. According to eyewitness accounts, prior to the execution, a soldier from the 564th Light Infantry Battalion was heard speaking on the phone in the courtyard. He was heard asking, "Boss, we have caught 87 people. What should we do?" He was heard asking, At the end of the court, the soldier turned to the others and relayed the order. We killed them. What followed were summary executions carried out systematically, victim by victim, with guns and knives. That killing en masse is corroborated by multiple witness statements and reports, including from the UN fact-finding mission, Human Rights Watch, the Associated Press, Fortified Rights, and Amnesty International. Quoting the words of one interviewee, the UN mission reported that some of the men and boys were shot first and their throats were slit with a knife. Others just had their throats slit. One survivor told Fortified Rights that the soldiers took away people in groups of 2 and 3, and one by one hacked on the back of their necks. Another witness, interviewed by the International State Crime Initiative of the Queen Mary University, described how a soldier from the 564th Battalion put a knife to the temples of the victims and used it to cut the back of their necks, while other victims were shot at close range by others behind them. Several of those in the courtyard were young children who were stabbed to death. One woman described how the Tad Madao killed her male family members, and I quote, "The courtyard was full of blood. They killed my husband, my father-in-law, and my 2 nephews of 15 and 8 years old. They even killed the child in the same manner," close quote. Some men were led from the courtyard to a nearby scrubland and murdered there. Another woman, 50 years old resident, described how the soldiers grabbed as many as they could and found in front of them, adding that, "My people were taken like this from the house to the edge of the hillside and shot." In a signed statement, one witness whom the court will call next week recounted how he nearly escaped death that day. His hands had been bound as he waited as the military began to take groups of 5 to 6 people to another place to kill them. He watched in terror as the military seized his 80-year-old father, who was executed and placed atop of a pile of dead bodies. When the soldiers ordered his group to stand, the witness broke free and fled. He was struck in the arm by a bullet but survived, and now appears to testify in these proceedings before this honorable court. Third, the clearance operation in Mongnu also involved brutal sexual assault and violent rape. Women fleeing from gunfire were seized, stripped, and subjected to body searches that devolved into sexual assault. Some were raped, and others were mutilated and killed. One survivor recounted to the UN fact-finding mission how, as she fled towards the hills to escape the shooting, soldiers caught her and gang-raped her in her husband's presence. In her words, and I quote, "3 members of the military took me. One man held me down and pushed me to the ground. They tore off my clothes. 2 men raped me. My husband could still see me," close quote. The witness was not alone. According to her, the Tad Madao took many other women, maybe around 10 to 20 women at different times. She saw those women being raped as well. Another witness who was hiding behind described a woman being violently killed by being stabbed in her genitals. Myanmar dismisses these accounts as being uncorroborated. In doing so, Myanmar simply ignores the clear determination by the UN fact-finding mission, based on multiple eyewitness accounts, that the women and girls were also gang raped and killed and mutilated in Mongnu. The sexual violence in Mongnu was not limited to acts of rape. When separating women from the men, the soldiers stripped women naked, took any valuable items, and ripped off their headscarves. Based on multiple interviews with women from Pongtamping and Mongnu, Amnesty International reported that many women were sexually assaulted during these body searches for valuables. Fourth, as in other villages, the clearance operation in Mongnu culminated in the destruction of Rohingya homes and the concealment and removal of bodies. UNISAD analysis of satellite imagery confirmed that in both Mongnu and neighboring Pongtamping, more than 300 structures were destroyed by fire. Witness accounts confirmed that the Tatmadaws used launchers to burn the houses. After executing the men and boys, soldiers were seen moving bodies from the courtyard into military trucks, which drove to the nearby army base. Other soldiers were seen burying bodies into shallow pits nearby. Human Rights Watch similarly reported in October 2017 that the soldiers were seen gathering the bodies on green tubs and loading them into pushcarts before taking them to military vehicles. Witnesses who returned to the village after the clearance operation saw body parts, including those of children, scattered on the ground, which felt sticky from blood. One witness recalled that the field was streaked with blood. There were trails of it on the ground, the trees, everywhere. Those witness accounts are corroborated by video footage and photograph analyzed by the UN fact-finding mission, showing patches of blood near the compound and tarpaulin bags buried just below the surface, with a decomposing human leg visibly protruding from one of the bags. Given the destruction of the village and the disposal of bodies, the precise death toll is difficult to ascertain. Various sources have estimated that approximately 100 to 200 people were killed in Mongnu on 27 August. Based on nearly 20 interviews with witnesses as well as its own review of several videos filmed in the aftermath of the clearance operation, Amnesty International reported that on 27 August, Myanmar soldiers summarily executed some of the men and boys in Mongnu, calling it a massacre. Mr. President, honorable members of the court, Myanmar's counterterrorism narrative does not account for the extreme brutality and the pervasive sexual violence in Mongnu. Myanmar does not dispute that the Tatmadaws conducted a clearance operation in Mongnu. Instead, Myanmar predictably asserts that the operation was purportedly necessitated by ARSA attacks and alleges that the Gambia omitted from its narrative the textual details that demonstrate that the clearance operation was in fact a counterterrorism operation. The textual details that Myanmar considers relevant to what transpired in Mongnu are embodied in two self-justifying sources of evidence. One, the Tatmadaws daily operation report, and two, the Ministry of Defense internal table prepared for this litigation, documenting the clashes between ARSA and the security forces, which are at annexes 118 and 149 of Myanmar's counter memorial. At most, they refer to ARSA-related activities in other locations surrounding Mongnu, such as Pongtamping, Ganang Chong, approximately 10 to 12 kilometers to the north, and Mongi Tong, approximately 5 kilometers to the southwest. With respect to Mongnu, the Third Madaw's operation report on your screens. Police arrived at the village around 10 a.m. Upon arriving, the security forces immediately carried out an outer perimeter security action, while another group carried out the security operation in the village. The Third Madaw's report then notes that at 13:15 p.m., hours after the Myanmar security forces had already arrived and began conducting the clearance operation, they were attacked by a group of Bengali terrorists, prompting the security forces to fight back. Characteristically, as was the case with other villages, Myanmar's government's report includes no details of what the Third Madaw did during the clearance operation, including the modus operandi described in the fact-finding mission reports or by the eyewitnesses in their sworn statements. The Third Madaw's reports are silent on the indiscriminate shooting at civilians, the systematic execution of men and boys, the rape and gang rape of women and girls, and the burning of homes and razing of villages. That absence, honorable members of the court, it's telling. It shows why it is difficult to place any evidentiary weight on these self-serving reports. But even if one assumes that the reports are true and that takes them at face value, they only show that the purported ARSA attack occurred several hours after the security forces had already entered the village, encircled civilians, and begun their violent sweep. In other words, even on Myanmar's evidence, the Third Madaw did not arrive at Mongnu in military trucks on 27 August in response to the ARSA attack. It deliberately chose to conduct a clearance operation based on an uncorroborated suspicion that ARSA members could be hiding around the village. Myanmar's attempt to retroactively justify its violence based on an alleged clash that was reported hours in the pre-planned raid is simply not credible. Myanmar has no explanation for the extreme brutality and sexual violence during the clearance operation itself. It merely speculates that those who fled from Pontamping to Mongnu would inevitably have included many ARSA terrorists, which likely explain the intensity of the subsequent clashes in Mongnu. Using the same logic or illogic, Myanmar does not dispute the high death toll in Mongnu, but notes that it is unknown how many of these are ARSA fighters or supporters. That rationale, honorable members of the court, does not even come close to justify the attacks against unarmed and defenseless civilians and the atrocities that were committed against them in Mongnu. What it reveals is that, for Myanmar, the unverified suspicion that ARSA members might be present in the village gave it a license to treat every Rohingya civilian, the men and boys who were executed, and the women and girls who were subjected to sexual violence as legitimate targets. Myanmar's response to the high death toll in Mongnu likewise underscored the indefensibility of its position. From Myanmar's perspective, the Third Madaws could kill first and rationalize later, invoking the intentionally broad and indiscriminate notion of ARSA and its supporters. The explanation that those who were killed were ARSA fighters or supporters also collapses entirely when confronted with the facts of how the clearance operation was concluded. Soldiers made no effort to identify the combatants or terrorists or sympathizers among the men and boys whom they rounded up and executed, or among the women and girls whom they raped, mutilated, and killed. Finally, Myanmar discredits that the evidence that the Gambia relies on, asserting that it is untested and mostly based on anonymous hearsay accounts. That sweeping assertion is untenable at the outset. The Gambia's evidence is diverse, independently corroborated, and mutually reinforcing. The various sources of evidence include not only eyewitness accounts and satellite imagery compiled by the UN fact-finding missions, detailed findings, but also several independent reports from organizations such as Amnesty International, Fortified Rights, the International State Crime Initiative, and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, as well as multiple signed witness statements. While some witness accounts are anonymized, reflecting the imperative to protect victims and other at-risk sources, they themselves are corroborated by multiple signed witness statements. As to the signed witness statements, Myanmar asserts that those are unreliable, primarily because, and I quote, they are silent as to the activities of ARSA activities. In a similar vein, Myanmar claims that the Gambia deliberately omitted two first-hand testimonies from Fortified Rights and purportedly corroborates aspects of the Tatmadao's operation report concerning the terrorist activity near Mongnu. Contrary to Myanmar's assertion, the two first-hand testimonies were not addressed because they are not directly relevant, as neither discusses the clearance operation in Mongnu to begin with. They simply refer to ARSA activities in other locations in Budidong Township, and where they do, they only contradict Myanmar's accounts of the Tatmadao's clearance operation as an allegedly limited and proportionate response to the imminent security threats. The first testimony is from a resident of Tong Bazar village, who describes how the following report of a bomb nearby Tinganat village. The military came to the village and arrested and beat people. Importantly, the witness adds that some of the military set houses on fire and arrested and killed young people, including the witnesses' 3 children, all younger than 10 years, who were forced to lie down on the ground while the military cut the backs of their necks. Myanmar makes no mention of these details in its rejoinder while addressing the witness statement. The second testimony, which is from the resident of Min Kwang Guan Suan village, mentions that there was a clash in Pontamping. The witness describes how the attackers had only sticks and knives, and how the entire village was burned down by the Tatmadaw. Those details are omitted by Myanmar in its rejoinder. As such, even the first-hand testimonies that Myanmar relies on to frame events ultimately corroborates the Gambia's evidence that the Tatmadaw burned Rohingya houses and inflicted extreme brutality on civilians, despite the limited rudimentary force of the attackers. In the rejoinder, Myanmar presents 2 IIMM witness statements, which purportedly supports its account of ARSA activities and presence in Mongnu. In fact, both statements reinforce the Gambia's case. The statement by witness P1496, a 48-year-old man, does nothing to contradict the Gambia's account of the clearance operation on 27 August. The witness accounts of ARSA activities surrounding the village are expressly limited to those in the months before 27 August. And the witness explains that during the clearance operation itself, he stayed in the neighboring village, collecting information from survivors and learning about who gunshots from Pontamping and makes no mention of ARSA activities in Mongnu. As to the events of 27 August, the statement corroborates the Gambia's account on various fronts. The witness describes how the soldiers arrived at the village and started firing in the direction of terrified villagers who were fleeing towards the hills, and recounts how the soldiers stripped women of their valuables by inappropriately touching their private parts and putting their hands on their whole body. We conclude by noting that, as is the case for other villagers, Myanmar's criticism reflects a tendency to pick at nits, avoiding the core substance and ignoring the convergent picture that emerged when the evidence on Mongnu is viewed cumulatively. When assessed as a whole, the evidence concerning the clearance operation on 27 August forms a compelling narrative that aligns with a broader, well-documented pattern of conduct in other Rohingya villages across Rakhine State, indiscriminate attacks on civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, the separation and execution of men and boys, sexual violence against women and girls, and the burning of Rohingya homes and destruction of their villages. In sum, the destruction of Rohingya as a group. Honorable members of the court, I thank you for your kind attention and respectfully request that Mr. Charles Kombenjai be called to the podium to continue the Gambia's submission.
I thank Ms. Mariana Ngum for her statement. I now invite Mr. Charles Kombenjai to address the court. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, members of the court, good afternoon. It's an honor to appear before you on behalf of the Gambia. My task is to address the evidence concerning additional locations in the northern Rakhine State, where the Tatmadaw systematically perpetrated the same pattern of atrocities against the Rohingya. As Ms. Pasipanodia, Ms. Ho, and Ms. Ngom just described, was committed in Minji, Chutpin, and Mangnu. In the written pleadings, the Gambia presented overwhelming evidence of indiscriminate and targeted killings, extreme brutality, and sexual violence in 40 locations across Mungdao, Butidong, and the Ratidong townships. These reflect just some of the hundreds of Rohingya villages that the UN fact-finding mission determined, on the basis of satellite image analysis, had been totally or partially destroyed following the clearance operations. Time does not permit us to review all of the evidence today, so I will confine myself to describing the same pattern of conduct that was characterized by Tatmadaw's clearance operations in 4 additional Rohingya villages in August of 2017. I will start with the village of Gudadpin, which is a Rohingya village within a mixed ethnicity village tract in the Botidong township, as shown on your screens. It is yet another village where the Tatmadaw unleashed a devastating assault on Rohingya of all ages. The UN fact-finding mission found, drawing from the testimonies of multiple eyewitnesses, that the Tatmadaw commenced its clearance operation on 28 August 2017 in Gudadpin. Soldiers and armed police, aided by ethnic Rakhine men, encircled the village and advanced from multiple directions, firing on villages, including young children, as they fled towards the paddy fields or jumped into the river to save their lives. One woman described to the mission, the soldiers were shooting at people who were running from burning houses to save their lives. People were running everywhere, in the paddy fields, jumping into the river, and hiding in trees. I saw people burning and people being cut. Another survivor recounted to the mission how she fled with her children into the forest and trying to cross the river, and that some children died trying to cross the river as it was raining and the water level was so high. These accounts are corroborated by independent reporting by Amnesty International. One villager, around 45 years old, described how he tried to escape with his wife and children towards the canal that separates the village of Gudarpin and neighboring villages. He said, "When we were running away, we were being followed by the soldiers. They were shooting. My 15-year-old daughter was shot as she was running with us. I took my youngest child on my shoulders. We were 10 feet from the canal. She had my hand. We were running, and she was shot. She was hit by 2 bullets, one on her left side and one on her left shoulder." Based on multiple eyewitness accounts, Amnesty International determined that dozens of Rohingya, including children, were killed while trying to flee. Others were last seen captured by soldiers and remain forcibly disappeared. One IIMM witness statement described how the military shot people who were running away and hiding. Those who came back to check on their homes were killed. The witness testified some people died in open fields, some in houses, and some on the roads. The UN fact-finding mission determined that during the operation, buildings were set on fire by the security forces and ethnic Rakhine men. The Tatmadaw used launchers and the ethnic Rakhine used petrol. The mission also determined, based on satellite image analysis, that all Rohingya structures in the village were burned to the ground by 16th September. Amnesty International likewise found that the Myanmar military attacked and burned vast majority of Gudarpin village. The Tatmadaw executed those captured or wounded by slitting their necks with knives or cracking their heads with rocks, before dragging their lifeless bodies into mass graves. As one witness testified in his witness statement, "From where I was hiding, I saw people injured by bullets and mortar bombs. They were lying down but were still alive. When the military found them, the military hit the heads of the injured with rocks and cut their necks or chests before pulling them into a grave. There were many injured, men, women, and children." One mother interviewed by the fact-finding mission described how she was forced to choose which of her children she could attempt to save. These 2 children would not live, but that she could perhaps save the life of her 2 younger children. When her husband arrived to Gudarpin, he dug through the piles of corpses and found the dead body of their son. They never found the dead body of their daughter. Another survivor, interviewed by Amnesty International, recounted being dragged through the village with her legs and hands bound together, and then gang raped by 4 soldiers. Yet another woman described being tied up, kicked, and on this occasion, violently gang raped by 3 soldiers. Myanmar urges the court to give zero weight to these women's testimony, invoking the purported evidential deficiencies of the fact-finding mission's findings and the 2018 report prepared by Amnesty International. That contention rings hollow in light of Myanmar's own written submissions on Gudarpin, which, when addressing the broader context of alleged arson activity in the area, rely heavily on both these reports and expressly treat the interviews and sources they contain as, I quote, reliable. Myanmar's blanket denial is further undermined by the fact that the mission and Amnesty International's account of Gudar Pin are corroborated by multiple witness statements gathered by Legal Action Worldwide and the IIMM. Myanmar's own evidence on Gudar Pin consists of the Tatmadao's daily operation report, the Ministry of Home Affairs' report on so-called terrorist attacks during 2016, which was apparently prepared in June 2022, and the Ministry of Defence's summary of table of clashes between terrorists and security forces, prepared in June 2020. As with other villages, those reports describe the clearance operation in Gudar Pin in the broadest possible terms, and without any mention of the ubiquitous violence against civilians. Conspicuously, there's no reference to the widely documented atrocities, such as the multiple mass graves discovered in the village that were reported in detail by Associated Press. Instead, the Tatmadao's daily operation report states that on 28 August 2017, at around 14:45 p.m., the Tatmadaw was ambushed by ARSA extremist Bengali terrorists wielding sticks, swords, and arms, whilst conducting a security operation in Gudar Pin. The report states that ARSA members withdrew to the south of the village, and the security forces gave chase, but nothing suspicious occurred. The only death or injury reported from the government side is a corporal receiving a non-critical cut to his left cheek. On Myanmar's own evidence, there was nothing to justify the Tatmadaw's brutal violence against civilians. The most that had occurred was an alleged attack with sticks and swords that ended with ARSA's withdrawal and virtually no casualty on government side. I now move on to two additional locations, Khotan Kok and Chen Kali. These are neighboring village tracts in the Rotterdam township, situated along the Bay of Bengal. The locations are shown on your screens. Within the Khotan Kok village tract was a military compound and a border guard police post. On 25th August 2017, around 4 a.m., residents of Khotan Kok and Chen Kali heard gunshots. The Tatmadaw alleged that 2 ARSA attacks took place and 7 ARSA members were killed. It could not have been much of an attack, since no casualties were reported on the government side. Notwithstanding this, in the early hours of 25th August, Tatmadaw soldiers, alongside other security forces and ethnic Rakhine, entered Chenkali, shooting at villagers fleeing from the village in terror, and methodically burning houses as they advanced from south to north. The UN fact-finding mission found that those not killed by gunfire were slaughtered by having their throats slit or being stabbed to death. The mission's determination are corroborated by witness interviews taken by Amnesty International. As one witness recounted, the soldiers entered, they stepped into the village, and they opened fire. Seeing them, I went back into my house, took all of my family, and we fled towards the nearby hill. Many people were running to the hill. Soldiers were coming from different directions, and we came across them. They opened fire. The same witness saw bullets hit his family members, including a 70-year-old woman. Myanmar asked the court to disregard these eyewitness accounts, asserting that they make no mention of the fact that those persons fleeing are likely to have been only a short time earlier engaged in a violent armed attack upon state security services. The absurdity of this speculation becomes clear when one considers that among those fleeing who were slaughtered and targeted were young children and infants. As one survivor who returned to the village recounted, I found my 6-month-old baby son's body lying next to my wife's body. She had been shot. My baby son was stabbed in the stomach, and his liver and intestine were coming out. When I took his small body into my lap, I was showered with his blood. On 28 August 2017, the Tatmadaw undertook another clearance operation in Khotan Kok, entering the village from both sides in the early hours of the morning. Soldiers opened fire at any sign of life, including the elderly and the disabled. Bullets were also fired from naval ships which were stationed just offshore. The brutality of Tatmadaw's violence in Khotan Kok mirrored that of Chenkali. Another account describes how soldiers caught her mother, tied her up to a tree, and set her alight after pouring petrol on her. Drawing on multiple interviews with survivors from Khotan Kok and Chenkali, Amnesty International determined that the clearance operation in the two villages followed a similar pattern of soldiers partially surrounding the village, opening fire as people fled, and with the help of vigilance, burning the villages as some people remained in their homes. The UN fact-finding mission additionally concluded, drawing from witness testimonies, that women were raped and killed in both villages. In Khotan Kok, one young girl who was raped was left naked and bleeding on the ground. In Chenkali, an eyewitness saw soldiers rape and kill his wife by slitting her throat, as well as kill all his children, all aged under 5. Like elsewhere, the Tatmadaw fired at Rohingya houses with launchers to set them ablaze, as those unable to escape, including the elderly and the disabled, remained trapped inside and burnt to death. Satellite image analysis reported by the UN fact-finding mission confirmed that all Rohingya hamlets inside the village tract were destroyed. This analysis is consistent with the witness accounts describing to Amnesty International how there were only a few green trees left. Everything else was burnt down. The mission also determined that the 2 ethnic Rakhine hamlets remained intact. Finally, I will address the events in Indine, which is a village tract in Mundao Township. It comprises of 6 Rohingya settlements and 2 small ethnic Rakhine hamlets. Its location can be seen on your screens. Prior to August 2017, Indine's population was predominantly Rohingya. The UN fact-finding mission found that on 25th August 2017, the Tatmadaw launched a week-long and children were killed and wounded. They were shot, they were stabbed or slashed with large knives and swords, including by persons in civilian clothes, believed to be ethnic Rakhine. One survivor described to the mission how she heard gunfire in the early hours of the morning and saw her neighbor's house ignite in flames. Bullets then entered her house, and her 3-year-old son was killed. The same survivor witnessed the bodies of her uncle and her brother-in-law with slit throats. The fact-finding mission interviewed another woman in a Bangladesh hospital in September 2017, who recounted seeing soldiers setting houses on fire and shooting at people, including her elderly neighbor. Another survivor, a mother from Indine, recounted the unbearable ordeal of being forced to watch her daughter gang raped, with her legs tied to different doors before her throat was slit and the house set ablaze. The eyewitness accounts in the fact-finding mission report are consistent with those provided in witness interviews conducted by Amnesty International and witness accounts compiled by Legal Action Worldwide. Survivors describe how the Tatmadaw led the assault, entering the village and firing at anyone in sight. The security forces slashed men, women, and children with large knives and swords and torched houses with people inside. One witness described how the Tatmadaw spared no one, including her husband, who was unable to walk. She said, "It was chaos when the military surrounded the houses. My husband was a bit physically disabled. One of my sons had fled, but came back and asked him, 'Can I carry you?' That was when soldiers came. They took both of them and shot and killed them. They died right by us." The UN fact-finding mission and Amnesty International concluded, based on aerial photographs and satellite imagery, that following the week-long clearance operation, Rohingya homes and properties were demolished and bulldozed, while the ethnic Rakhine properties remained untouched. Myanmar concedes there were no ASA attacks in Indine on 25 August 2017, when the clearance operation began. It instead tries to justify the operation by referencing ASA attacks on border guard police posts in neighboring village tract of Tin Bao Kwe and Ta Win Chong. According to the Ministry of Defence's table of clashes, the 25th August incidents at Tin Bao Kwe and Ta Win Chong, each lasting an hour or less, resulted in no government casualties. Those incidents could not possibly form the catalyst, much less the justification, for the systematic killing of the Rohingya civilians at Indine. After its general assault on the village, the Tatmadaw summarily executed 10 men and boys, including 2 high school students, as authoritatively documented by Reuters. In tab 4 of the judge's folder is a photo of these men in Tatmadaw custody with their wrists tied behind their backs. A subsequent photo from Reuters, which I must respectfully warn, includes graphic content that may be difficult to view, captures the moments immediately after those men were executed, and is also included in tab 4 of the judge's folder. Myanmar has acknowledged these extrajudicial killings, but seeks to minimize their significance, claiming they were acts of retribution for the disappearance and suspected murder of an ethnic Rakhine man the week before. It admits that soldiers permitted the man's son to violently assault them with swords before the firing squad killed them. That narrative does not exonerate. It condemns. It shows that the Tatmadaw not only summarily executed civilians, but also facilitated vigilant violence against them on the basis of their identity as Rohingya. In sum, Myanmar claims that what occurred in these locations were counter-terrorism operations necessitated by and responsive to lethal attacks by ASA. The evidence proves otherwise. The assault on Rohingya civilians in each of these villages reflect the same organized, targeted campaign of extremely brutal killings of Rohingya civilians, men, women, and children, and sexual violence against women and girls carried out across the 3 townships in the northern Rakhine state. Mr. President, members of the court, we thank you for your kind attention throughout this afternoon's sitting. This concludes the Gambia's presentation for today.
I thank Mr. Charles Secounday whose statement brings this sitting to a close. The oral proceedings in the case will resume tomorrow, Wednesday, the 14th of January 2026 at 10 a.m., when the Gambia will continue its first round of oral argument. The sitting is closed.
Oh, Bayanekol. Amar Bayanekol. Itara Bonguri Gia. Itara Bonguri di Valay, Hura di Valaywa. Toy. Arayo Bonguri Gunda Imboy. Shukriya, Begunas. Manage Kurisalajan Hujantol, Ya Kurihanson Asa. Toy. Begune Sundurguri Saidia, Allah Begunore, Shukriya. Jania Gundana gave Suktu Guragurogi, Suktu Guragurogi. Gundana gave Morbayanekal Bekulum. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Morbayanekal. Eta Arar by Ogbaye Dubai Dian message Lekiwa. Polasat Mother Gwele Kedere. I message anore Relasia. I am Rohingya Muslim refugee Bangladesh. Thank you so much, Gambia. Good. Very good. You so much, Gambia. Shukriya tanai itiri. Aigwa Rohingya Muslim refugee Bangladesh tasi. Tai Gambia re besa besa shukriya ko itiri. Ar bai be shukriya tanai itiri. Ibo ide Anas Khan. Tai Arar bai Argua se ibo ide Ruanas. Ruanas se akan powerful message leke. Ruanas hadde I am a genocidal survivor. Watching live from the FDMN camp in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, with the hope for justice. We have the Aigwa genocide survivor. Aigwa komhotom karuai gorede inotun base shidegwa manush enghotiria. Watching live from the FDMN. Money live and side FDMN camp. FDMN camp hotiba FDMN money forcefully displacement Myanmar national বুঝলেন forcefully displace Myanmar national মানে জোর করিয়রে দুমরা দিয়ে দে বর্মার দেশত্যা বাংলাদেশের ক্যামেরা হদেরি forcefully displace Myanmar national বাংলাদেশের ক্যামেরা জিন্দিগি রোহিঙ্গারে বুঝি কল আছে ইতারারে লক অফ দিদিরি FDMN manual de forcefully displace Myanmar national in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar. তো এই বে হদ্দারো আই লাইভ বা সাধ্যে মানে কি সই ইনসাফর আশা লইরে এন হয়ে দেওয়া বুঝছেন আরিদ্দা হালিয়েও আছে এরে আরিদ্দা হালিয়ার গো গিয়া কালা 10,000 জিন্নাত টাইমত কালা 10,000 আরিদ্দা হালিয়ার গো আই আরিদ্দা হালিয়ার গো জিন্নাত টাইমত 10,000 Hi, Zinilogo. Reason of Sarguji tomorrow and time. Aidahilla on time of the Aidahilla, Ere the Hadde. Soya Aidahalia Ere time Soya Aidahalia Saribade, Salish, 5 minute of the Hadia. এখন না হদানি তোমরা স্ক্রিন শেয়ার গুজিয়ে দে আইদালিয়া এরিয়া সারে বাদে 45 মিনিট মা দাহারা আইদালিয়ার গো 14 তারিখ নিয়া আরে 14 তারিখ গো 14 তারিখ গয়া 14 তারিখ বুধবার সারে বাদে 45 মিনিট মাঝে তাহাবু দিরিয়া এরা আরো ডল্লা বড়ল্লা আসিয়া আছে ও তাছে ওকে এদুরি বে মোর ভাই এনে কল see you tomorrow হাল্লা দেখা গুজুম মোর ভাই এনে কল see you tomorrow হাল্লা দেখা গুজুম see you tomorrow karena hoban tomolo bayan okay bayan akal तुम्हारे बगुल गुंजो गयला बेगुने गुंजो गई এরা আরো দল্লা বল্লা দিবা তো ইনকুদিন কি ও মারে এরা তো বহুত দিলে দিবা রে ও ও হ্যাঁ মারে জোর হলো ও গগো ট্রাই করে সাই কি দিবা রে তো ওমারে ওমারে এর ব্রেকিং নিউজ আছে ও ব্রেকিং নিউজ thank you for watching oh yeah thank you for watching dia huru de yeah ma omare mare mare জোর হরে এরে গগো ট্রাই করে সাই দিয়ে ভাই বুঝানিয়া এরে মানা যে শিশুন দিয়ে ইনকা ট্রাই করে সাই দিয়া জদ্দের আর বার হ্যাঁ ও এরে জদ্দের ব্রেকিং নিউজ আছে এরে মতো Tata, assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.